Hello and welcome to the Story Engine podcast. My name is Kyle Gray, and today we're going to be talking about the strength in your weakness and the weakness in your strength. You see, there's a strange paradox that I've seen over the course of working with hundreds of clients and high achievers in health and wellness, in entrepreneurship, in coaching, and in marketing. And oftentimes, through the stories that we create through their talks, I discover that the very strengths that end up building their success, their drive, their discipline, their ability to get things done can quietly limit their growth. And at the same time, the very parts of yourself, and I've experienced this firsthand and we'll share more on this, that you've labeled as weakness, the moments that felt like failure, shame, or vulnerability, often hold the keys to your next evolution, the magnetic message, your real power. And this paradox shows up everywhere, but nowhere more clearly than when you're speaking. Because when you're on stage, you're not just delivering a message, you're putting your identity on display, at least if you're doing it right. You're trying to inspire, to sell, and to lead. And in that moment, what you choose to say and not to say reveals so much about what you believe that makes you strong. And that's why I say a talk is never just about a performance. It's a transformation. And the most powerful talks that I've helped to create didn't come from somebody's most polished wins. They came from the stories they almost didn't want to tell, moments they almost left behind. What they thought was a curse turned out to be the seed of their greatest strength. Let's start with a character that's one of my favorites from fiction that can help us relate to this idea a little more clearly. One of the clearest examples of this lives in one of the most beloved stories ever told, The Lord of the Rings. Now, Frodo Baggins isn't a warrior. He's not the strongest, the smartest, the most magical. He has no great title, no royal bloodline, no skill with a sword. But he's the one who carries the ring. And he's the one that survives what no one else could. He's the one, by the very nature of his heart, his humility, his kindness, his endurance, saves Middle-earth. Side note, but not so side note to this, I recently saw an image of a count of how many times each character cried in the trilogy of Lord of the Rings. And Frodo Baggins was far above and top. And I can't think of any other hero, any other main figure. There's actually quite a lot of men who cry in that film or in those films, which I think is a really powerful and aligned representation of masculinity. But Frodo, again, who seems to be the weakest, the most vulnerable, the most feeling, is the one who goes the farthest where no one else can and slips under the expectations of Sauron, who is expecting a powerful, strong warrior to come and try and challenge him, which is why in the very end of those movies, spoiler alert if you haven't seen them already, I'm really sorry, but you need to go out and see them, which is why when all of the people come and charge Mordor at the very end and draw Sauron's focus away, Frodo's able to sneak into the volcano and do what he was meant to do. But anyway, bringing this back on topic, what makes him powerful, it's what most people might overlook, especially in this medieval fantasy land of great characters and wizards and strength. But his greatest weakness was his greatest strength. And that's exactly what I see in so many of the leaders that I work with. You see, many of them have spent years building themselves up. They're used to leading with their sharpest and most practiced tools, their experience, their wins, their brilliance, their ability to work hard. But when we sit down to craft a talk, something unexpected happens. They discover and we reveal that the real power isn't just in their victories. It's in their humanity. And the stories they thought were too soft, too personal, too raw to share. Let me give you an example of this in the real world. Recently, I had the honor of working with Shamina Taylor, who is a transformational wealth expert for high achieving women. And we crafted a signature talk for her just a week before recording this very episode. And when Shamina came to me, she already had an incredibly successful business. She was a powerful leader, sought after coach, and someone who's helped thousands of women rise into wealth and power. And the story and the talk that we crafted together didn't start with wins. It started with her old identity as being a high achieving lawyer. And at the time, her greatest strengths were exactly what you would expect. She could push, she could grind, she could outwork anyone in the room. It's how she built her career, and it's how she survived. But here's the thing, those very strengths became the cage that she lived in. The energy of doing it all, staying in control, holding it all together came at a cost. Her marriage was falling apart. Her health was declining. She was having a hard time relating to herself or figuring out why she wasn't happy. Even though she was successful, she was drained, unfulfilled, angry. And through the process of creating her talk together, we started peeling back the layers and shared some profound and some lighthearted moments of disconnection, of heartbreak, of trying to be everything for everyone while feeling like she was losing herself. Then we talked about the shift of moving away from the energy of forcing to the energy of truth, to the energy of softness, of surrender, of recapturing her feminine energy and essence, which became the strongest part of who she was, which allowed her to attract more wealth, which allowed her to live in alignment in ways that she could have never expected before. And we built out a 3-part framework for women to do just that, to receive, to feel, to create space, and not just solutions, and open themselves up to quantum leaps forward in their life instead of incremental progress through hard work. And every woman that she's worked with and serves is also trained in this same masculine energy. What they think is their strength, what they think is what they need to survive and succeed in this world, and what they feel is their weakness is their feminine energy. And being able to access this shows them that there's another way, that receiving can be powerful, that softness is not weakness, it's wisdom. And that's what happens when you stop leading from the version of yourself that you think the world wants and start sharing the vision that actually needs to be seen. There's a quote often attributed to Nelson Mandela that often stays with me and I feel fits in the theme of what we're talking about today. I had to leave behind the man who entered prison in order to become the one who could leave it. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years behind bars, and yet when he emerged, he wasn't filled with vengeance, even though I feel like he had one of the best cases and one of the best reasons to be upset. He didn't lead with dominance. He led with forgiveness, with clarity, with purpose. At the time, this looked like weakness to the outside world, but it became the furnace where his greatest strength was forged and allowed the healing and unification of a country that was in great pain. He came in angry and he came out as a leader, not in spite of the suffering, but because of how he chose to meet it. And in that transformation, that shift from identity to truth, that's something that I see mirrored again and again in the stories of many of my clients. One of those clients is Michael R. Hunter. And just a few weeks before recording this episode, we sat down to create a high converting talk. Michael and I worked together to create a signature talk for his business, personalbrand.com. And we begin his talk with a story of him running a high-level marketing agency. Big clients, big wins, big revenue. On paper, he had everything. But behind the scenes, he was barely holding it together. There was one night an all-nighter that changed everything. Cans of Red Bull stacked all around his desk, eyes bloodshot, and the sun just barely starting to rise over the horizon as he was working all night. He realized he couldn't keep doing this. And in this moment of intensity, he discovered that he was the bottleneck, that he was holding everything up. Even though the brand he built looked strong from the outside, on the inside, it was fragile, overextended, unsustainable. Michael came to see in that moment that the very way he positioned himself as this brilliant creative magician who could pull a rabbit out of a hat at any moment, who could put out any fire, solve any problem, was attracting the wrong kind of energy, was attracting the wrong kind of clients who demanded and expected him to constantly create this magic, projects that demanded chaos. And when he did create this magic and do these incredible things, they didn't thank him. It was what they expected. He didn't have a business problem. A lot of the ways he looked like he was successful with lots of money, good results, and all of these things. But he was burning out on this path. And through this, he discovered he had a brand problem. This would plant the seeds for what would become personalbrand.com. His business, an agency that would allow people to showcase who they were more completely, more fully, and attract the right clients to his business. And it came from this moment of weakness, of frustration, of recognizing that what he thought made him strong, his ability to work really hard, to work fast, to be the most talented person, was actually the thing holding him back. And once he stepped away from that and rethought that, he created his greatest strength and a brand new business, which created personal alignment in his life, shapes his success, and he's now helping many other entrepreneurs and thought leaders build brands that reflect who they really are. Not the version that they've been performing, but the version that they're ready to embody. Okay, on to another example of someone who found strength in weakness and weakness in their strength. Very famous author and speaker, Brene Brown, built her career around studying shame, vulnerability, and courage. She was a PhD, an academic, and for a long time developed her strengths in an academic way. But what changed her wasn't her data. It was her decision to actually engage with these ideas and become part of it. In one of her earliest viral talks, she shared a deeply personal breakdown. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that honesty, the raw, messy uncomfortableness, touched something in people. Because she wasn't just presenting research anymore, she was living it. She became proof of her own process, of her own ideas. Her own stories and reflections and moments would create a context for her data and her information, which would create a level of success and impact and prominence that very few PhD researchers would achieve. And it came from recognizing that in herself. I see this same leap and roadblock in much of the work that I do with my clients. So many of them come to me with endless expertise. They've spoken many times before. They've created great results for their clients. They know the frameworks. They know their talking points. They know their credentials. But the talk that they really need to give, the talk that converts and transforms, usually comes from somewhere deeper. Not just about what you know and the success you've created and the achievements that you have, but in really sharing who you are, what you've lived. And getting to that place isn't always easy. You can't strategize your way into truth. You have to uncover it. And that's why my process isn't just about what's polishing what's already there. It's about asking questions and uncovering the truth from within it. It's about holding the right space for people and having a curiosity to go deeper than just what's on the surface. It's about guiding someone back to the story that actually wants to be told, the one that they're too close to see on their own. And just like Brene Brown needed to live her work before it landed, my clients need to revisit their own humanity before their message usually connects. And when they do, that's when it clicks. That's when their talks become magnetic. That's when they stop performing and start transforming. And there's something that every single one of the people that we've talked about today have in common. Shamina, Michael, Brene, Frodo Baggins. They couldn't do it alone. Not because they weren't brilliant, not because they didn't have their own story, but often because they were too close to it. And that's the irony of being an expert, of being a leader. The deeper that you go in your work, the harder that it becomes to zoom out because you know too much. You care too much. And you've rehearsed the same version of your story for years. And now you're not sure if it still fits. It's almost impossible to tell what to cut and what to keep from your own perspective. And you'll start second guessing everything. Usually this means you'll overstuff your talk or you'll make it so surface level that it doesn't land. And that's why this work cannot be done in isolation. My clients don't just hire me to write a talk. They come to me to ask the questions that they've stopped asking themselves, to find the stories that they've forgotten or maybe even tried to forget, to build a container that helps them see their own brilliance, their own uniqueness with fresh eyes. This isn't just about teaching more, it's about revealing more. And when you do that, your talk becomes a mirror, not a mask. And that's when your audience starts to feel it. It stops being a performance and starts being a transmission, a magnetization of those who you are here to serve. And from there, the conversions, the impact, and the opportunities, they all follow. But only when the message is real. Only when it's rooted in something true. In every one of these stories shared today, there's a moment where strength and weakness trade places, where what seems like a liability becomes a gift, where the old identity cracks and something more honest, more powerful, more you comes through. And that's what I help my clients find. Not just the strategy, not just the story, but the alignment between who they are, what they've lived, and how they've showed up to lead. And so if you feel like your message isn't quite landing, I hope that today can show you at least one little glimpse at how you can find something that will connect, something that will transform. And in sharing more of who you are, in looking at what you might perceive as your weaknesses to find your strength, and to maybe look away from the strengths that you've been relying on so much. I hope that this will transform your message and your journey. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you on the next Story Engine podcast. Please share this with one person that could benefit from hearing it, and rate and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts.